Wrong target, wrong night, guys. They thought he was just a tired single dad in a diner, until he tore through their masks like a soldier, and the town learned the truth he'd sworn to bury. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The fluorescent lights of Joey's all-night diner cast a soft glow onto the empty parking lot. Inside, the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the gentle clink of coffee cups created a peaceful late-night melody. Ethan Cole pushed through the glass door, the little bell announcing his arrival with a gentle chime. His shoulders slumped with exhaustion as he made his way to the counter. The vinyl cushion of the stool squeaked under his weight. The diner was empty except for Jimmy, the teenage busboy, who was mopping the checkerboard floor near the kitchen. Norah Bennett looked up from wiping the counter, her kind eyes crinkling at the corners as she offered a warm smile. "Welcome to Joey's," she said, reaching for a clean mug. "Rough night?" Ethan managed a tired smile. "Just one of those days. Coffee would be great, thanks." The rich aroma of fresh coffee filled the air as Norah poured him a cup. Steam curled upward in delicate wisps. Her movements were graceful and practiced. Speaking of years spent in this same routine. "Sugar? Cream?" she asked. "Black is fine," Ethan replied, wrapping his hands around the warm ceramic. The heat seeped into his tired fingers. Norah nodded, tucking a strand of honey-brown hair behind her ear. She continued wiping the counter in slow, methodical circles, maintaining a comfortable distance that respected his obvious desire for quiet. Ethan took a sip of coffee, letting the warmth spread through his chest. His thoughts drifted to Grace, safely tucked in at Mrs. Henderson's next door. His daughter had been extra clingy tonight, asking for 3 bedtime stories instead of the usual one. Sometimes he wondered if she sensed his restlessness, his constant vigilance. "You're Grace's dad, aren't you?" Norah's gentle voice broke through his thoughts. "I've seen you two at the park on Sundays. She has your smile." Ethan looked up, surprised. "You've noticed us?" "Hard not to," Norah replied with a soft laugh. "She's got such a bright spirit, always sharing her swing with other kids." Pride warmed Ethan's chest. "Yeah, that's my girl. Too kind for her own good sometimes." "There's no such thing as too kind," Norah said, folding her cleaning cloth. "This world could use more of it." Something in her voice carried a weight of experience, a familiar echo of loss that Ethan recognized all too well. He studied her more carefully now, the slight shadows under her eyes, the simple gold band she still wore on her left hand. "How long have you worked here?" he asked, surprising himself with the question. "Going on 15 years now," Norah answered, her fingers absently touching her wedding ring. "Started when Tom, my husband, and I first moved to town. Kept at it after he passed. Some nights, this place feels more like home than anywhere else." Ethan nodded, understanding more than he could say. "Grace and I moved here 8 months ago. Needed a fresh start. Those aren't easy to come by," Norah said softly. "But sometimes they find us anyway." Their eyes met briefly, a moment of mutual recognition passing between them. Two people who knew what it meant to carry on, to build something new from the pieces life left behind. Jimmy's mop squeaked against the floor, a quiet reminder that they weren't alone. The teenager hummed softly to himself as he worked, oblivious to the moment of connection happening at the counter. Ethan checked his watch. 11:47 p.m. He should head home soon, relieve Mrs. Henderson from her babysitting duties. But something about the quiet diner, the gentle presence of this kind-eyed waitress, made him want to linger just a little longer. "Could I get a refill?" he asked, pushing his cup forward. Norah's smile returned as she reached for the coffee pot. "Of course, we've got plenty. And you look like you could use it." The fresh coffee steamed invitingly as she poured. Outside, a car passed by, its headlights briefly illuminating the inside of the diner. The shadows danced across the walls before fading back into the familiar fluorescent glow. "You know," Norah said, setting the pot back on its warmer, "Grace reminds me of the little girl I used to be, always trying to make friends with everyone at the playground." "Did it work?" Ethan asked, genuinely curious. "Most of the time," she chuckled. "My mother used to say I never met a stranger I couldn't turn into a friend. These days, I mostly make friends with coffee cups and regular customers." Ethan smiled, the expression feeling more natural than it had in months. "Seems like you're still pretty good at it." A faint blush colored Norah's cheeks as she busied herself with reorganizing the sugar packets. The comfortable silence returned, broken only by the distant sound of Jimmy's mop hitting the bucket. The wall clock ticked steadily toward midnight. Ethan sipped his coffee, feeling some of the day's tension begin to ease. Maybe this was what he'd needed, not just the caffeine, but this moment of quiet connection with someone who understood loss without needing to discuss it. The bell above the door jingled suddenly, sharp and jarring in the peaceful quiet. 4 men strode in, their faces obscured by dark masks, and the gentle atmosphere of the diner shattered like fragile glass. The bell above the door jingled again, and 4 men in dark ski masks burst into the diner. The leader, tall and broad-shouldered, brandished a gun while the others spread out across the room. The peaceful night shattered like broken glass. "Nobody move!" the leader barked. His voice was rough, muffled behind the mask. Jimmy, the busboy, dropped his mop with a clatter. Nora's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a gasp. Ethan remained perfectly still on his stool, his coffee cup halfway to his lips. The second robber jabbed a finger at Ethan. "That's him! That's the guy Marcus told us about!" His words came out in an excited rush. Ethan's brow furrowed slightly, but his face remained oddly calm. He set his coffee cup down with deliberate care, the ceramic making a soft click against the counter. "Empty the register!" the leader shouted at Norah, who stood frozen behind the counter. "Now!" "Leave her alone," Ethan said quietly. His voice carried an authority that seemed to fill the small diner. The leader swung his gun toward Ethan. "Shut up. You've caused enough trouble already. Marcus sends his regards." Confusion flickered across Ethan's face, but it was gone in an instant. His eyes darted between the 4 men, taking in their positions, their weapons, their nervous energy. "I don't know any Marcus," Ethan said evenly. "But you're making a mistake." One of the robbers grabbed Nora's arm, yanking her toward the register. She stumbled, crying out in pain. Jimmy stood trembling by the kitchen door, tears streaming down his young face. Everything happened in a blur after that. The robber nearest to Ethan made the mistake of getting too close. In one fluid motion, Ethan's hand shot out, gripping the man's wrist. He twisted sharply, and the weapon clattered to the floor. The move was precise, practiced, the kind taught in police academies, not self-defense classes. "Get back," Ethan commanded, pushing Norah behind him. His body shifted into a protective stance that spoke of years of training. The leader fired a wild shot that shattered the coffee pot behind them. Glass and hot coffee rained down as Norah screamed. Ethan moved with surprising speed, keeping his body between the gunman and the others. "Jimmy," Ethan called out, his voice steady despite the chaos. "When I say run, head for the kitchen. Norah, stay close to me." The remaining robbers seemed unsure now, their earlier confidence cracking. This wasn't going according to their plan. The man Ethan had disarmed scrambled backward, clutching his injured wrist. "You're supposed to be an easy target," the leader shouted, his voice rising with frustration. "Just some guy who owes money." "Wrong target," Ethan replied coldly. His eyes never left the leader's gun. Another robber made a grab for Norah, but Ethan was faster. His elbow connected with the man's solar plexus, dropping him to his knees. The move was textbook law enforcement, controlled, efficient, meant to disable without killing. "Run!" Ethan shouted. Jimmy bolted for the kitchen. Norah stayed close behind Ethan as he backed them slowly toward the counter. The leader's gun hand was shaking now, betraying his inexperience. "This isn't worth it," one of the masked men said, pulling at the leader's arm. "Let's go!" The leader fired another shot, this one going wide and shattering the front window. The sound of breaking glass seemed to break their resolve. They stumbled backward toward the door, dragging their injured companion with them. "This isn't over," the leader called out as they fled into the night. Ethan didn't relax his stance until the screech of tires told them the robbers were gone. In the sudden silence, they could hear Jimmy crying in the kitchen and the first faint wails of police sirens in the distance. "Are you both okay?" Ethan asked, finally turning to check on Norah and Jimmy, who had crept back out from the kitchen. His hands were steady as he helped Norah to a chair, but his eyes were alert, scanning for any remaining threats. Norah nodded, though her whole body was trembling. "How did you? Where did you learn to?" "We need to get you out of here," Ethan cut her off gently. "Those sirens are still a few minutes out, but we should lock up. It's not safe to stay." Norah's hands shook as she tried to find her keys. Ethan helped her gather her things while Jimmy called his parents. The teen's voice quavered as he spoke into his phone. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving Norah unsteady on her feet. Glass crunched under their shoes as they made their way to the door. Ethan insisted on checking outside before letting them exit. "I'll walk you home," he said firmly, no room for argument in his voice. Norah just nodded, too shaken to protest. They moved quickly under the yellow glow of street lamps, Ethan's eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. The sirens grew louder behind them, but he kept them moving forward. Norah hugged her purse close to her chest, her breath coming in short gasps. "You've done this before," she said finally, looking up at him. It wasn't a question. Ethan kept walking, his expression guarded. The man who had so efficiently handled armed robbers seemed at a loss for how to handle simple conversation. His silence spoke volumes about secrets he wasn't ready to share. The streetlights cast long shadows as Ethan and Norah approached her small white house with its neat flower boxes and worn welcome mat. Norah's hands still trembled slightly as she fumbled with her keys. "Please, let me make you some tea," she said, turning to face him. "After what you did back there, it's the least I can do." Ethan shifted his weight, glancing down the quiet street. "That's not necessary, ma'am. I should get back to—" "I insist," Norah cut in gently. "You saved my life tonight. One cup of tea won't hurt." Her kind eyes held a mixture of gratitude and something else, concern, perhaps. After a moment's hesitation, Ethan nodded. "All right, 1 cup." Inside, Norah's home was modest but warm, with soft lamplight and family photos on the walls. The kitchen held the lingering scent of fresh-baked cookies. While she filled the kettle, Ethan remained standing, his trained eyes automatically scanning exits and entry points. "Please sit." Norah gestured to her small kitchen table. "You're making me nervous, hovering like that." Ethan managed a small smile and lowered himself into a chair. "Force of habit. Sorry." The kettle whistled, and Norah busied herself with 2 mugs of chamomile tea. She set one before Ethan, along with a plate of chocolate chip cookies. "They're from yesterday, but still good." "Thank you." Ethan wrapped his hands around the warm mug but didn't drink. Norah settled across from him, studying his face in the soft light. "Those moves back there, that wasn't just luck or gym training, was it?" Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. He took a careful sip of tea before answering. "I used to be a cop. Detective, actually." "Used to be?" Norah's voice was gentle, inviting confidence without pushing. "Left the force about 2 years ago." His eyes fell to the steam rising from his mug. "Had to make some changes. For Grace." "Grace?" A genuine smile touched his lips for the first time that night. "My daughter. She's 7. He pulled out his phone, showing Norah a photo of a beaming little girl with her father's dark hair and bright eyes. "She's beautiful," Norah said softly. "Is she with her mother tonight?" "It's just us," Ethan replied, his voice carrying a protective edge. "Has been since she was 4. Mrs. Martinez from next door watches her when I need to clear my head." Norah nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Being a single parent isn't easy. I see plenty of them at the diner, especially late at night. Sometimes people just need a quiet moment to themselves." "Grace is everything to me," Ethan said, his voice low but fierce. "That's why I left the force. The job. The risks. I couldn't do that to her. Couldn't let her grow up without." He trailed off, taking another sip of tea. Norah watched as his hand tightened around the mug. "But old habits die hard. The training stays with you," he admitted. "The instincts. Sometimes they're useful, like tonight. Other times." He shook his head. "Those men," Norah ventured carefully. "They seemed to think they knew you." Ethan's expression closed off slightly. "They were mistaken. Wrong target, wrong night." He glanced at his watch and started. "It's almost 2. I need to get back to Grace." "Of course." Norah stood quickly. "Let me wrap up some cookies for her. Every child should have something sweet for breakfast sometimes." As she gathered a few cookies and wax paper, Ethan rose from the table. "Thank you for the tea. And I'm sorry about all this. You shouldn't have had to experience any of it." Norah handed him the small package of cookies. "Don't apologize. If you hadn't been there." She shuddered slightly. "Well, let's just say I'm grateful you were." At the door, Ethan paused. "You'll be okay?" "I'll be fine," Norah assured him, though her eyes darted briefly to the windows. "The police have my statement, and my neighbor's light is still on. Besides," she managed a small smile, "I have your number now, Officer Cole." "Not an officer anymore," he reminded her quietly. just a dad trying to do right by his little girl. "Sometimes that's the most important job of all," Norah said softly. Ethan nodded, then stepped out into the night. Norah watched from her doorway as he walked briskly down the street, his figure gradually disappearing into the darkness. Only when he was completely out of sight did she close and lock her door, double-checking each bolt with trembling fingers. Standing in her quiet kitchen, she gathered the empty mugs, her mind replaying the events of the night. There was something in Ethan's eyes when he spoke about leaving the force, something that hinted at deeper wounds than he was willing to share. And those men, they had seemed so certain. The clock on her wall ticked steadily toward 2 in the morning. Somewhere across town, a former detective was hurrying home to his sleeping daughter, carrying cookies and secrets in equal measure. Early morning sunlight filtered through the thin curtains of Ethan's modest rental house, painting warm stripes across his bed. He'd barely managed 3 hours of sleep, his mind replaying the events at the diner over and over. The mattress suddenly dipped as Grace, already dressed in her favorite unicorn pajamas, launched herself onto the bed with the boundless energy only a 7-year-old could muster at 7 in the morning. "Daddy, wake up!" She poked his shoulder repeatedly. "Can we have pancakes? Please, please, please." Ethan cracked open one eye, unable to suppress a smile despite his exhaustion. "Good morning to you too, sweetheart. Mrs. Henderson said you came home super late," Grace said, crossing her legs and bouncing slightly. "Were you fighting bad guys?" Ethan's chest tightened at her innocent question. He sat up, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "No fighting. Just had some coffee at the diner." He pulled her into a warm hug, breathing in the sweet smell of her strawberry shampoo. "Now, about those pancakes." "Yes!" Grace pumped her fist in the air. "Can I help mix the batter?" "Of course you can, Chef Grace." He lifted her off the bed and set her down. "Go wash your hands while I get everything ready." In the kitchen, Ethan moved with practiced efficiency, pulling out bowls and ingredients. Grace returned, dragging her pink stepping stool to the counter. She carefully measured flour while Ethan cracked eggs. Their movements, a well-choreographed dance born from countless weekend mornings together. "Daddy, you're putting in too many chocolate chips." Grace giggled as Ethan deliberately dropped extra ones into the batter. "No such thing as too many chocolate chips, kiddo." He winked at her. "That's Cole family law." As Grace stirred the batter, her tongue poking out in concentration, Ethan glanced out the kitchen window. A dark sedan was parked across the street, its engine running. His muscles tensed instantly, years of training kicking in. The car didn't belong to any of their neighbors. "Can I flip them?" Grace asked, pulling his attention back. "Let's do it together," Ethan said, keeping his voice steady despite the unease crawling up his spine. He lifted Grace onto his hip, letting her hold the spatula while he guided her hand.
"See? Wait for the bubbles to form, then flip."
Grace squealed with delight as they turned the first pancake, revealing a perfect golden brown surface. When Ethan looked out again, the sedan was pulling away, moving too fast for a residential street. They sat down to eat, Grace drowning her stack in maple syrup while chattering about her upcoming school project. Ethan nodded at appropriate intervals, but his mind was elsewhere. The attack at the diner, the men who seemed to know him, and now a suspicious car outside his house. The coincidences were stacking up uncomfortably. "Daddy, you're not eating," Grace pointed out, maple syrup dripping down her chin. Ethan forced himself to take a bite, pasting on a smile. "Just thinking about how lucky I am to have such an amazing pancake-making partner." Grace beamed, chocolate smeared at the corners of her mouth. "We make the best team." "That we do, sweetheart." Ethan reached across the table to wipe her face with a napkin. "That we do." He watched Grace demolish her breakfast, her legs swinging happily under the table. The morning sun caught her dark curls, so much like her mother's, and his heart clenched. He'd promised himself after Sarah died that he'd keep their daughters safe, give her a normal life away from the dangers that had defined his career. But now, watching the spot where the sedan had been parked, he couldn't shake the feeling that last night's incident wasn't just a random robbery gone wrong. "Can we go to the park later?" Grace asked, pulling him from his thoughts. "We'll see, sweetie. I've got some work to do first." Ethan started gathering their plates, his eyes automatically scanning the street through the window again. The sedan was long gone, but the unease remained, settling in his stomach like a heavy weight. Grace hopped down from her chair, humming a tune as she skipped to the sink with her glass. "I'm going to draw you a picture while you work," she announced. "It's going to have a dragon and a unicorn. Can't wait to see it," Ethan said, pulling her close for another hug. She wrapped her small arms around his waist, squeezing tight before bouncing off to her room. Watching her go, Ethan's jaw clenched. He thought they'd been careful, moving to this quiet town, keeping a low profile. But now, as he replayed the events of the previous night, the masked men's confidence, their apparent mistake in identifying him, and now the watching car, his instincts screamed that something bigger was at play. The memory of the diner robbery took on a darker edge. The way the leader had pointed at him, claiming he was their target. It hadn't felt like a genuine case of mistaken identity. It had felt like a message. The afternoon sun blazed through the diner's wide windows, casting cheerful rectangles of light across the checkered floor. Ethan held Grace's small hand as they pushed through the glass door, the familiar bell chiming above their heads. The lunch crowd had thinned, leaving only a few regulars scattered among the red vinyl booths. Norah looked up from where she was refilling a customer's coffee cup, and her whole face brightened. "Well, look who's here." She set the coffee pot down and walked over, smoothing her apron with slightly nervous hands. "Hi," Grace chirped, swinging her father's hand. "Daddy says you make the best grilled cheese in town." Norah's eyes crinkled with genuine warmth as she knelt to Grace's level. "And your daddy must be Ethan Cole." "I've heard so much about you, sweetheart." She glanced up at Ethan, a silent understanding passing between them about the previous night's events. "Pick any seat you like," Norah said, straightening up. "The booth by the window has the best view of Mrs. Peterson's flower garden across the street." Grace tugged her father toward the suggested spot, her pink backpack bouncing against her shoulders. Ethan slid into the booth opposite his daughter, his body automatically positioning itself to face the door. Old habits died hard. "Can I color while we wait?" Grace asked, already pulling out her worn coloring book and a handful of crayons. "Of course, Princess." Ethan helped her arrange her supplies, then watched as Norah approached with menus and 2 glasses of water. "So this is the famous Grace," Norah said, setting down the glasses. "Your daddy mentioned you love art." Grace beamed, holding up her coloring book. "I'm working on a unicorn. Do you want to see?" "I'd love to." Norah settled into the edge of Grace's booth, admiring the carefully colored picture. Her presence felt natural, like she belonged there with them. "You know, I used to love coloring too. Still do, actually." "Really?" Grace's eyes widened. "Daddy says grown-ups don't usually color." Norah laughed, a gentle sound that seemed to warm the whole diner. "Well, sometimes grown-ups forget how to have fun. I keep a coloring book in my break room." Ethan watched the easy interaction between them, something in his chest loosening. He hadn't seen Grace warm up to someone so quickly since her mother left. "Do you have kids?" Grace asked innocently, selecting a purple crayon for her unicorn's mane. A flicker of sadness crossed Norah's face, but her smile remained gentle. "No, sweetheart. My husband and I, we wanted them, but sometimes life has different plans." She touched the simple gold band she still wore. "Tom, that was my husband. He passed away 3 years ago." Grace put down her crayon, her young face serious. "My mommy left when I was little. Daddy says sometimes grown-ups make choices we don't understand." Ethan reached across the table, squeezing his daughter's hand. "Grace," but Norah shook her head slightly at him, her eyes kind.
"That's very true, Grace. And you know what? It's okay to be sad about it sometimes."
Grace nodded solemnly, then brightened. "But I have the best daddy in the whole world. He makes pancakes with chocolate chips and reads me stories with all the funny voices." Norah's laugh mingled with Ethan's this time, the sound filling the diner with unexpected joy.
"Funny voices, huh?"
She raised an eyebrow at Ethan. "I wouldn't have guessed that about you, Mr. Cole." "Please, it's Ethan," he said, feeling his cheeks warm slightly. "And I'll have you know my 3 little pigs impression is legendary. He goes, 'Little pig, let me come in,'" Grace demonstrated in a growly voice that sent Norah into another fit of laughter. "Well then," Norah said, pulling out her order pad, "what can I get for this impressive voice actor and his artistic daughter?" "Grilled cheese," Grace declared. "With extra cheese, please." "Make that 2, Ethan added. And maybe a chocolate milk for the artist? Grace's eyes lit up. Can I, Daddy? Really? Special occasion, he said with a wink. As Norah walked away to place their order, Ethan watched Grace return to her coloring, humming quietly to herself. The diner felt different in the daylight. Safer, warmer somehow. The events of last night seemed almost like a bad dream. When Norah returned with their drinks, she slid a fresh sheet of paper beside Grace's coloring book. I thought maybe you'd like to draw something new. The unicorn looks a little lonely. Grace's entire face lit up. Thank you. Maybe I'll draw you two. Me? Norah touched her chest, looking genuinely touched. Uh-huh. You have pretty hair, like sunshine. And you're nice, like a fairy godmother. Ethan nearly choked on his water, but Norah just laughed, her cheeks pink with pleasure. Well, that's about the sweetest thing anyone's ever said to me. Thank you, Grace. As she moved away to check on other customers, Ethan watched her go, noting how she stopped to chat with elderly Mr. Jenkins, topping off his coffee with a gentle pat on his shoulder. She moved through the diner with grace and genuine warmth, making everyone feel special. Their grilled cheese sandwiches arrived perfectly golden, the cheese melting just right. Grace took a big bite and gave Norah an enthusiastic thumbs up, cheese stretching comically from her mouth to the sandwich. Grace, Ethan admonished gently, but Norah was already laughing. That's exactly the reaction I was hoping for, she said, dropping into their booth again during a lull in customers. So, how's the legendary grilled cheese verdict? Even better than Daddy said, Grace declared, already halfway through her sandwich. They fell into easy conversation, Norah sharing stories about the diner's regulars while Grace worked on her drawing. The afternoon light shifted slowly across their table, creating a peaceful bubble that felt separate from the rest of the world. For the first time in a long while, Ethan felt something like contentment settle in his chest. Look, I finished. Grace held up her drawing proudly. She had indeed drawn Norah, complete with her blue uniform dress and sunny blonde hair. But she'd also added wings and a sparkly wand, turning her into the promised fairy godmother. Oh my goodness, Norah breathed, taking the picture carefully. This is beautiful, Grace. May I keep it? Really? You want to? I'll hang it right up in my break room, next to my coloring books. Grace beamed, then looked thoughtful. Maybe next time I can bring my special markers. They have glitter in them. Next time? Ethan found himself saying, surprised by how much he liked the sound of that. Norah met his eyes, something soft and hopeful in her expression. Well, we do serve breakfast too, and I make pretty good pancakes myself. A car sat idling across the street, its windows tinted dark against the afternoon sunday. Inside, a figure watched the scene through the diner's wide windows. The laughing child, the waitress's gentle smile, and the man who had ruined everything just months ago. The evening settled over the small town like a heavy blanket, bringing with it the kind of quiet that made every sound seem sharper. Ethan had just finished reading Grace her favorite bedtime story, The Little Engine That Could, and tucked her into bed with her worn stuffed elephant. He smiled as she snuggled deeper into her pink comforter, already drifting off to sleep. The living room felt empty without her chatter. Ethan sank into his weathered armchair, running a hand through his dark hair. The events at the diner kept replaying in his mind. The masked men, the fear in Norah's eyes, the familiar way they had moved. Something about it nagged at him, like an itch he couldn't scratch. His cell phone buzzed on the coffee table, screen lighting up with blocked number. Ethan's jaw tightened. Years of police work had taught him there was no such thing as coincidence. He picked up the phone, his thumb hovering over the green answer button for a moment before pressing it. Hello? Well, Detective Cole. The voice slithered through the speaker, sending a chill down Ethan's spine. He knew that voice, smooth as oil and twice as toxic. Or should I say, former Detective Cole? Marcus. Ethan's voice came out flat, controlled. He stood up, moving away from Grace's bedroom door. I thought you were still enjoying state hospitality. A dry chuckle crackled through the line. Good behavior, my friend. Amazing what a few well-placed friends can do. Speaking of friends, that waitress seems nice. What's her name? Norah? Ethan's free hand clenched into a fist. The casual mention of Norah's name felt like a physical blow. Leave her out of this. Oh, but she's already in it. Just like your precious little Grace. Marcus's voice hardened. You remember what happened to the last person who crossed me, don't you? Your partner wasn't so lucky. The memory of screeching tires and gunfire flashed through Ethan's mind. His partner, Tom's face, frozen in that final moment of surprise. The investigation that followed, the corruption he'd uncovered, the case that had almost put Marcus away, until key witnesses disappeared and evidence vanished from lockup. That night at the diner, Ethan said slowly, pieces clicking into place. Your men weren't there for a simple robbery. Smart as ever, Cole. They were supposed to send a message to someone who owes me money. Imagine their surprise when they recognized you instead. Marcus paused. Consider it a happy accident. Now I can finish what we started. Ethan paced the living room, mind racing. It's been 3 years, Marcus. I'm out of the game. But the game's not out of you, is it? Once a cop, always a cop. Those moves at the diner, my boys told me all about it. Marcus's voice dripped with malice. You took everything from me. My reputation. My business connections. Now it's my turn. Touch my daughter or Norah. And You'll what? Marcus cut him off. Hide behind that badge you turned in? Run away again? Face it, Cole. You're alone. No backup, no partner, no protection. Just a single dad playing house in a small town. The call ended with a click, leaving Ethan standing in the silent living room. His phone displayed the call duration, 3:42. Less than 4 minutes to shatter the peace he'd built over 3 years. He moved quietly to Grace's room, easing the door open. She slept peacefully, her dark curls spread across her pillow, one arm wrapped around her elephant. The sight of her made his chest ache. He'd moved them here to keep her safe, to give her a normal life away from the dangers of his past. Back in the living room, Ethan knelt by the bottom drawer of his desk. The key was where it had always been, taped under the drawer above it. Inside, wrapped in a soft cloth, lay his badge. The metal still gleamed, catching the lamplight. Next to it sat his service weapon, cleaned and maintained but unused for 3 years. Ethan picked up the badge, its weight familiar in his hand. The memories came flooding back. The pride of graduation day. Years of serving with honor. The gut-wrenching decision to walk away when he realized how deep the corruption went. He thought distance would keep Grace safe. He thought time would make Marcus forget. He'd been wrong. Worse, he'd dragged Norah into this mess. Sweet, strong Norah, who'd already lost so much, who looked at Grace with such genuine warmth, who made him feel, for the first time since his wife died, that maybe there was room for joy again. Now she was in danger because of him, because he'd chosen this town, this diner, this moment to let his guard down. Ethan sat heavily in his armchair, the badge cold in his palm. The ticking of the wall clock seemed to mock him, counting down to a confrontation he couldn't avoid. Marcus wouldn't stop. Men like him never did. They fed on fear and weakness, twisted every act of mercy into an opportunity for cruelty. Through the window, the street remained quiet and dark. But Ethan knew better now. Somewhere out there, Marcus's men were watching, waiting, planning their next move. He couldn't run, not again, not with Grace's future at stake, not with Norah's safety hanging in the balance. The badge caught the light again, as Ethan turned it over in his hands. He'd walked away once to protect what mattered most. Now, to do the same, he would have to stand and fight. Ethan stared at the badge in the drawer, its surface reflecting the dim light of his lamp. His past wasn't just catching up, it had kicked down his door and made itself at home. The question wasn't whether he could outrun it anymore. That option had vanished with Marcus's call. The real question was, what would it cost to face it? The morning sun cast long shadows across the diner's worn linoleum floor as Ethan pushed through the glass door. The familiar bell chimed above his head, but today its cheerful ring felt like a warning. The breakfast rush had ended, leaving only a few regulars nursing their coffee cups. Norah stood behind the counter, her honey blonde hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. Her face brightened when she saw him, but Ethan's serious expression made her smile fade. "Coffee?" she asked, already reaching for a clean mug. "Actually," Ethan said quietly, glancing around the nearly empty diner. "Could we talk? Somewhere private?" Norah nodded, concern creasing her brow. "My break's in 5 minutes. We can sit in the back booth." She gestured to the corner spot, partially hidden by a partition wall. Ethan settled into the vinyl seat, his back to the wall where he could watch both exits. Old habits died hard. When Norah joined him minutes later, she carried 2 steaming mugs of coffee. "What's wrong?" she asked, sliding into the seat across from him. "You look like you haven't slept." "Those men from the other night," Ethan began, his voice low and controlled. "They weren't random robbers. They're part of something bigger, something from my past." He wrapped his hands around the warm mug but didn't drink. "They might come back." Norah straightened her spine, lifting her chin. "I've handled difficult customers before, Ethan. This is my diner, my life. These aren't difficult customers," he cut in, leaning forward. "These are dangerous men who won't think twice about hurting innocent people." His eyes met hers, pleading for understanding. "I can't let that happen. Not again." "Not again?" Norah repeated softly. Ethan's shoulders sagged slightly. The weight of his past pressed down on him like a physical thing. "I was a detective in Chicago," he began. "My partner, Mike, and I were investigating a gang running drugs through the city. We got close, too close. Started uncovering corruption within the department itself." Norah reached across the table, her warm hand covering his. The simple gesture of comfort nearly undid him. "Mike had a family too. 2 kids, beautiful wife." Ethan's voice grew rough. "One night, we were supposed to meet an informant. I got delayed picking up Grace from school. Mike went ahead alone." He paused, swallowing hard. "It was a setup by the time I got there." "Oh, Ethan," Norah whispered, her eyes filling with tears. "The gang had connections inside the force. The investigation was buried. I tried fighting it, but they made it clear Grace would be next." His free hand clenched into a fist. "So, I left, resigned, moved us here where nobody knew us. Started over. Until now," Norah added softly. "Until now." Ethan nodded grimly. "I need you to be careful, Norah. These people, they use whatever leverage they can find. Anyone they think matters to their target becomes fair game. And I matter?" The question hung between them, loaded with unspoken meaning. Ethan met her gaze steadily. "Yes, you do." Norah didn't pull her hand away. Instead, she squeezed his fingers gently. "My husband used to say that carrying burdens alone doesn't make us stronger, it just makes us lonely." She smiled sadly. "After he died, I learned he was right. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is let others help carry our load." "I can't ask that of you," Ethan protested. "It's not safe. You're not asking. I'm offering." Norah's voice was firm. "This town, this diner, they're my home. I won't be driven away by fear." She paused, then added softly, "Would you like me to pray for you?" The question caught him off guard. It had been years since anyone had offered to pray for him. Since Mike's death, his faith had felt as distant as his former life in Chicago. But something in Norah's gentle offer broke through his carefully constructed walls. Yes," he managed. "I would like that." Norah bowed her head, still holding his hand. Her words were simple but heartfelt, asking for protection, guidance, and peace. As she spoke, Ethan felt something shift inside him like a door long rusted shut had cracked open, letting in a sliver of light. When she finished, they sat in comfortable silence. For the first time since Mike's death, Ethan felt truly seen, not as a former cop, not as a single father, but as someone worthy of care and prayer. The moment was broken by the sound of an engine idling. Ethan's trained eye caught the glint of something metallic through the diner's front window, across the street. A dark sedan sat running, its tinted windows hiding its occupant. But the camera lens pointed their way was clearly visible. The autumn breeze rustled through the maple trees lining Jefferson Elementary's playground as Ethan waited outside the red brick building. His eyes continuously scanned the area, a habit from his detective days he couldn't shake. The final bell rang, and moments later, children poured out of the double doors like confetti from a party popper. Grace's purple backpack bounced as she ran toward him, her dark pigtails swinging. "Daddy! Daddy! Guess what we did today?" Her face glowed with excitement as she threw her arms around his waist. "What did you do, sweetie?" Ethan knelt to her level, brushing a stray hair from her face. Despite his worries, her enthusiasm was contagious. "We're doing a family tree project." She pulled out a large piece of construction paper from her backpack, nearly dropping everything else in the process. "See, Mrs.? Thompson says we need to fill it with pictures and stories about our family. Ethan's heart squeezed as he looked at the empty branches. Since Grace's mother had left when she was a baby, family had always been a sensitive topic. That sounds like a great project, honey. And guess what else? Grace continued as they walked to the car, her small hand in his. Norah invited us for dinner tonight. Can we go, Daddy, please? Her brown eyes, so like his own, pleaded up at him. He had already agreed when Norah called earlier, but he pretended to think about it. Well, I suppose we could. Yes. Grace jumped with joy, then chatted all the way home about what she hoped Norah would cook. Later that evening, they stood on Norah's front porch. The modest white house, with blue shutters, looked warm and inviting, golden light spilling from its windows. The smell of pot roast wafted through the screen door. Come in. Come in. Norah welcomed them, wearing an apron over her casual clothes. Her smile seemed to light up the whole room. Grace, would you like to help me set the table? Can I, Daddy? Grace was already halfway to the kitchen before Ethan could nod. The dining room was small but cozy, with family photos lining the walls. Ethan noticed one of a younger Norah with a man he assumed was her late husband. She caught him looking and gave a small, understanding smile. Over dinner, Grace dominated the conversation, telling Norah all about her family tree project. Mrs. Thompson says we can include anyone who feels like family, she explained, twirling her fork in the mashed potatoes. They don't have to be related by blood. Norah's eyes softened. That's very true. Family comes in all shapes and sizes. Like you, Grace said brightly. You feel like family. Can I put you in my tree? The question hung in the air for a moment. Ethan's fork paused halfway to his mouth, his chest tight with conflicting emotions. Part of him warmed at how easily Grace had welcomed Norah into their lives, while another part ached with guilt, knowing he'd brought danger to her doorstep. Norah's eyes glistened as she reached across to squeeze Grace's hand. I'd be honored, sweetheart. The conversation shifted to faith when Grace noticed the cross hanging on Norah's wall. Do you go to church? She asked, between bites of carrots. Every Sunday, Norah replied. It helps me remember that even when things are hard, we're never alone. Daddy used to take me, Grace said, but we haven't gone in a long time. Ethan shifted uncomfortably in his chair. His faith had wavered after his partner's death, after seeing too much darkness in the world. But watching Norah's quiet strength, the way she'd maintained her beliefs despite her own losses, made him wonder if he'd given up too easily. After dinner, Grace helped clear the table, chatting with Norah about school and her favorite books. Ethan watched them together, his heart both full and heavy. Norah moved around the kitchen with Grace, as if they'd done this 100 times before, showing her how to properly dry the dishes, praising her careful work. Time to head home, Grace, Ethan finally said, checking his watch. You've got homework to finish. Grace's lower lip jutted out. But Daddy... No buts, young lady. Say thank you to Norah. Instead of just saying thanks, Grace threw her arms around Norah's waist. Thank you for dinner. Can we come back tomorrow? Norah laughed, returning the hug. We'll see. Maybe this weekend? After dropping Grace at home with their elderly neighbor Mrs. Chen, Ethan insisted on walking Norah back to her house. The night air had grown cooler, and streetlights cast long shadows on the sidewalk. They walked in comfortable silence until they reached her porch. Thank you, Ethan said quietly, for everything, Grace. She hasn't had many women in her life to look up to. She's a wonderful girl, Ethan. You've done an amazing job with her. As they approached her front door, Ethan's instincts suddenly flared. Something was wrong. The door stood slightly ajar, though he distinctly remembered Norah locking it when they left. Stay behind me, he whispered, his body tensing. Pushing the door open slowly, he reached for a gun that wasn't there. Another habit from his former life. Inside, the cozy home they'd left just 30 minutes ago was transformed. Cushions had been torn from the couch, drawers pulled open, papers scattered across the floor. The family photos that had hung so neatly were now crooked or fallen. Someone had searched the house thoroughly and quickly. Norah's sharp intake of breath behind him spoke volumes. Her sanctuary had been violated, her peace shattered, and Ethan knew with crushing certainty that it was because of him. The morning sun had barely touched the tips of the maple trees when the first casserole appeared on Norah's doorstep. By 9 o'clock, her small front porch looked like a potluck waiting to happen. Mrs. Chen, Ethan's neighbor, had brought over her famous dumplings. The retired postman, Mr. Rodriguez, delivered a still warm apple pie along with promises to keep watch on the street. Norah stood in her doorway, overwhelmed by the parade of familiar faces. Each person who came brought not just food, but a piece of their heart. Old Earl from the hardware store insisted on installing better locks free of charge. His weathered hands worked quickly as he shared stories about the town's history, filling the house with comfortable chatter that helped chase away the shadows of last night's violation. At the diner, the morning rush felt different. Regular customers lingered longer than usual, their eyes alert and protective. Tommy Wilson, a Vietnam veteran who always sat at the counter, nursed his coffee with unusual focus. His friend Jack, another vet, had taken up position by the window. "Nobody's going to mess with our Norah," Tommy declared, his voice gruff but kind. "Me and the boys, we may be old, but we still know how to stand guard." Ethan watched from his usual booth as the diner transformed into something like a command center. Mike, the teenage busboy, had convinced his older brother, a computer whiz, to install security cameras. The local seniors who gathered for their morning coffee had organized themselves into informal watch shifts. Even Ethan's landlord, Mr. Peterson, a man who usually communicated entirely in grunts and nods, showed up at the diner. He pulled Ethan aside, his usual scowl softened slightly. "Listen here," he growled, though not unkindly. "I got a buddy who runs a security company. We're putting in an alarm system at your place. No arguments." He paused, then added gruffly, "That little girl of yours, she deserves to feel safe." By lunchtime, Sarah from the flower shop had organized a phone tree. The town's retired police chief stopped by to give Norah his personal number, along with some practical safety advice. Mrs. Thompson, Grace's teacher, brought by a care package full of tea and cookies, insisting that comfort food was essential in times of trouble. Norah moved through her shift with tears threatening to spill every few minutes, touched by the outpouring of support. Each regular customer had a way of letting her know they were there for her, whether through extra generous tips, lingering protective glances, or simple words of encouragement. "I've lived here 30 years, she told Ethan during a quiet moment. "But I never knew how much this town could feel like family until today." Ethan nodded, his throat tight. He'd spent so many years running, keeping his guard up, that he'd forgotten what it felt like to be part of a community. These people weren't trained law enforcement, but their determination to protect their own carried its own kind of power. Around mid-afternoon, Pastor Dan from the local church arrived. He sat with Norah during her break, praying with her and offering words of comfort. But he did more than pray. He helped organize the community's efforts, turning concern into action. "The church basement can be a safe place if you need it," he told both Norah and Ethan. "We've got cots, supplies, and people ready to help at a moment's notice." The diner's owner, Joe, who usually ran things from behind the scenes, made a rare appearance. He gathered everyone's attention by clearing his throat loudly. "Starting today, we're changing things up a bit," he announced. "We're hiring security for the night shift, and I'm adjusting schedules so nobody works alone." He looked at Norah with fatherly concern. "And you're taking a few days off with pay. No arguments." Throughout the day, Ethan observed the town's response with growing amazement. Every hour brought new offers of help, more people stepping up to show they cared. It wasn't just about protecting Norah, though. That was certainly part of it. The town was making a statement. They took care of their own. By evening, when Ethan picked Grace up from school, the community support had taken solid shape. The diner had a new security system being installed. Norah's house was equipped with better locks and lights. A network of neighbors had organized themselves into an informal neighborhood watch. "The thing about small towns, Mrs. Chen told him as she handed over a container of her homemade soup, "is that we might gossip and squabble, but when one of us is in trouble, we all stand together." That night, as Ethan tucked Grace into bed, her small face looked serious in the glow of her nightlight. She clutched her stuffed rabbit close, her eyes wide with concern. "Daddy, is Norah going to be okay?" Ethan sat on the edge of her bed, smoothing her hair back from her forehead. The weight of the day, the community's response, the reminder of what was at stake pressed on his heart. "Yes, sweetheart, Norah's going to be okay. We have a lot of people helping to keep her safe." The evening settled like a warm blanket over Norah's small house. Through lace curtains, the last traces of sunset painted the kitchen in soft oranges and pinks. Steam curled up from 2 coffee mugs on the worn wooden table where Ethan and Norah sat, their voices hushed to avoid waking Grace, who had drifted off on the living room couch after an evening of board games. "I've had officers watching the diner all week," Ethan said, turning his mug slowly. "Nothing suspicious so far, but—" He trailed off, shoulders tense beneath his plain blue shirt. Norah reached across the table, her fingers barely touching his hand. "You don't have to carry this alone anymore, Ethan." The touch surprised him, but he didn't pull away. Her hand was warm from holding her coffee cup, and something about the gentle pressure of her fingers made his carefully constructed walls begin to crack. "My partner, Jim," Ethan started, his voice rough. "He had 2 kids, a boy and a girl. Every Christmas, he'd dress up as Santa for them." He swallowed hard. "The day he died, we were following a lead on the gang. Standard procedure. But someone had tipped them off. They were waiting." Norah's hand tightened on his. In the living room, Grace mumbled something in her sleep, and both adults glanced toward the sound before Ethan continued. "I got shot in the shoulder, Jim." His voice cracked. "Jim didn't make it. And later, when I started asking questions about the tip-off, things got complicated. Department politics, cover-ups. I couldn't prove anything, but I knew someone on the inside had betrayed us." Tears welled in Norah's eyes. "That's why you left the force." Ethan nodded, his jaw tight. "I couldn't trust anyone anymore. Grace was only 4. I had to keep her safe." "I understand," Norah whispered. She was quiet for a moment, then said, "Tom, my husband, he died of cancer 3 years ago." Her voice wavered, but held steady. "It was quick. 6 months from diagnosis to the end. He was so strong through it all, always trying to make me laugh. Even in hospice, he'd tell these terrible jokes." A tear slid down her cheek, and Ethan found himself reaching out to brush it away before he could think better of it. The gesture felt natural, like something he'd done 1,000 times before. "The hardest part," Norah continued, leaning slightly into his touch, "was watching him slip away and not being able to do anything. But you know what he told me? The night before he passed, he said, 'Norah Bennett, don't you dare lock up your heart when I'm gone.'" Their eyes met across the table, and something electric passed between them. Ethan's thumb traced a gentle path along her cheekbone, and Norah's breath caught. "I haven't felt safe, truly safe, since Tom died," she admitted softly. "Until now, until you." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Ethan's heart hammered in his chest. He wanted to tell her how she made him feel whole again, how her kindness had started to heal wounds he thought would never close. But before he could find the words, a small voice came from the living room doorway. "Daddy?" Grace stood there in her rumpled clothes, hair mussed from her nap on the couch. She rubbed her eyes sleepily. "Hey, sweetheart," Ethan said softly. "Ready to head home?" Grace padded over to them, still half asleep. She wrapped her arms around Norah in a drowsy hug. "Good night, Mommy," she murmured, then froze as she realized what she'd said. Norah went completely still, her eyes wide. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then, slowly, tenderly, a smile spread across Norah's face. She hugged Grace back, pressing a gentle kiss to the top of her head. Ethan watched them, his heart so full it felt like it might shatter. The sight of his daughter in Norah's arms, the natural way they fit together, the love radiating from both of them, it was everything he'd ever wanted and everything he feared he didn't deserve. Grace pulled back, suddenly more awake and embarrassed. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean—" "It's okay, sweetie," Norah assured her, voice thick with emotion. "It's more than okay." Ethan stood, his chair scraping softly against the linoleum floor. "We should get you home to bed, Grace," he said gently, though everything in him wanted to stay in this moment forever. As he gathered Grace's things, movement caught his eye through the window. Headlights swept across the front of the house, a car slowing as it passed. The beam of light lingered for a moment, throwing long shadows across Norah's kitchen, before continuing down the street. The warm bubble of their evening burst, reality rushing back in. But even as worry crept back into Ethan's mind, he couldn't forget the feeling of Norah's hand in his, or the way she'd looked when Grace called her Mommy. Whatever danger lay ahead, he knew now what he was fighting for. Sunday morning dawned bright and clear, the kind of day that made everything feel possible. Ethan adjusted Grace's yellow dress collar, as they walked up the weathered steps of First Baptist Church. His daughter bounced with excitement, her patent leather shoes clicking against the wooden boards. "Look, Daddy, there's Miss Norah." Grace pointed toward the entrance where Norah stood greeting people, wearing a simple blue dress that made her eyes sparkle. Nora's face lit up when she saw them. "I wasn't sure you'd come," she said softly to Ethan, while Grace hugged her legs. "Neither was I," Ethan admitted, tugging at his tie. It had been years since he'd worn one, not since his partner's funeral. Mrs. Henderson, the silver-haired choir director, ushered them inside. The sanctuary smelled of old hymnals and fresh flowers. Wooden pews, worn smooth by generations of faithful worshipers, lined the aisle. Stained glass windows cast colorful patterns across the floor. "We're so glad you're here," whispered Mr. Jenkins, the hardware store owner, as they slid into a pew. Other familiar faces turned to smile. The diner regulars, the retired police chief, even the teenage busboy who'd been there that night at the diner. Grace settled between Ethan and Norah, her small hand finding Nora's naturally. The gesture made Ethan's throat tight. He couldn't remember the last time his daughter had felt so at ease with someone. The choir filed in, their robes swaying like a gentle wave. Mrs. Henderson raised her hands, and the first notes of Amazing Grace filled the air. The harmony wrapped around Ethan like an embrace, stirring memories of Sunday mornings from his childhood. Pastor Mike stepped up to the pulpit, his kind face scanning the congregation. "Today," he began, "we gather not just as a church, but as a family. When one of us faces darkness, we all stand together in the light." Ethan felt Nora's eyes on him, full of understanding. Around them, heads nodded in agreement. "We've seen evil try to take root in our town," the pastor continued. "But we've also seen courage. We've seen love. We've seen God's hand at work through His people." Several members stood to share stories about times the community had pulled together, about moments when faith had carried them through fear. Mrs. Peterson spoke about losing her husband to cancer and how the church had surrounded her with support. Her words made Norah dab at her eyes with a tissue. When it came time for prayer, Ethan hesitated, but Grace tugged his hand, and he found himself bowing his head. The pastor's words washed over him. "Lord, we lift up our brother Ethan, our sister Norah, and sweet Grace. Shield them with your mighty hand. Show them they're not alone. Amen," the congregation responded in unison. After the service, they gathered in the fellowship hall. Tables groaned under the weight of covered dishes. Mrs. Henderson's famous fried chicken, green bean casseroles, and enough desserts to feed an army. The air hummed with conversation and laughter. Grace ran off to play with other children, while Ethan and Norah found themselves surrounded by well-wishers. Chief Roberts, now retired, clapped Ethan on the shoulder. "Son, you've got more backup than you know. We've got a schedule worked out," Mrs. Jenkins explained, showing Norah a piece of paper. "Different folks keeping watch at different times. Nobody messes with our own." Ethan watched as Grace played tag with the pastor's kids, her giggles echoing off the walls. For the first time in years, he let himself imagine a different kind of life, one where he didn't have to look over his shoulder constantly, where Grace could have a mother figure again, where faith and love could overcome fear. Norah touched his arm gently. "You okay?" "Yeah," he said, surprising himself by meaning it. "I think I am." They stayed longer than he'd planned, sharing meals and stories with people who were quickly becoming more than neighbors. When Grace fell asleep on a pew, her head in Nora's lap, Ethan felt something shift in his heart. This could be home. This could be family. As the afternoon light began to fade, they said their goodbyes. Arms full of leftovers and warm wishes, they stepped out into the cooling air. That's when Ethan felt his phone vibrate in his pocket. With one hand, he pulled it out and checked the screen. Unknown number. The message made his blood run cold. "You can't hide, Cole. We're coming for her next." The setting sun cast long shadows across Nora's quiet street as Ethan made another slow pass in his truck. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, eyes scanning every shadow, every parked car, every movement. The text message from earlier burned in his mind. A cat darted between trash cans, making him tense. He'd left Grace with Mrs. Henderson after church, the elderly choir director insisting on having a girls' afternoon of cookies and stories. Now, as dusk settled, something felt wrong. The air seemed too still. like nature itself was holding its breath. Movement caught his eye. A dark figure slipping between houses 3 doors down from Norah's. Ethan killed his engine, watching. Another shadow moved near Norah's back fence. His heart rate picked up as training kicked in. He reached for his phone, quickly texting the neighborhood watch group they'd set up. Through Norah's front window, he could see her moving around her living room, probably getting ready for her evening shift at the diner. She had no idea what was coming. The attack happened fast. Glass shattered as 2 masked men crashed through Norah's back door. Her scream pierced the evening quiet. Ethan was already running, gun drawn from his ankle holster. Behind him, porch lights snapped on as neighbors responded to his text. "Norah!" he shouted, reaching her front door just as something crashed inside. Through the window, he saw one man grabbing her while another ransacked the room. Ethan didn't hesitate. He kicked the door in. The first attacker spun, releasing Norah, who stumbled backward into her coffee table. Ethan tackled him before he could draw his weapon. They crashed into the wall, pictures falling around them. The second man pulled a knife. "Let her go!" Mr. Garcia from next door appeared in the doorway with his son, both wielding baseball bats. The knife-wielding attacker hesitated. Norah scrambled away, her face pale but determined. She grabbed a heavy vase from the side table and swung it at the second attacker's head. He ducked, but the distraction gave Ethan the opening he needed. He slammed his elbow into the first man's face, feeling cartilage crunch. "Police are coming!" someone shouted from outside. More neighbors had gathered, creating a barrier at both doors. The second attacker lunged at Ethan with the knife. Ethan blocked with his forearm, feeling the blade slice through his jacket. Pain flared, but adrenaline kept him moving. He trapped the man's knife hand and drove his knee up, dropping him to the floor. The first attacker staggered up, blood streaming from his nose. He pulled something from his jacket. Metal glinted in the dim light. "Cole," he spat through his mask. "This ain't over." "Drop it!" Ethan commanded, but the man swung toward Norah instead. Ethan didn't think. He threw himself between them as the gun went off. The bullet whizzed past, embedding in the wall. Mr. Garcia's son swung his bat, catching the gunman in the back. The weapon clattered to the floor. Both attackers scrambled up, shoving past the gathering neighbors and disappearing into the darkness. Norah stood trembling, her living room in shambles. Blood trickled from a cut on her forehead where she'd hit the coffee table. "Grace," she whispered. "We need to get Grace." Ethan was already pulling out his phone. "Mrs. Henderson? Lock your doors. We're coming to get Grace now." Red and blue lights began flashing outside as police cars screamed around the corner. Ethan gathered Norah close, feeling her shake. "We need to move fast. They'll be back with more men." Neighbors crowded the doorway, offering help and shelter. Mr. Garcia's wife appeared with car keys. "Take our SUV," she insisted. "They won't recognize it." Ethan nodded gratefully, keeping his arm around Norah as they hurried to the vehicle. Her hands clutched his jacket. "My home," she said softly, looking back at the chaos. "Everything I had of David's was in there. We'll come back for it," Ethan promised, helping her into the passenger seat. "But right now, we need to get somewhere safe." They picked up Grace, who was thankfully still playing happily with Mrs. Henderson's grandchildren, unaware of the danger. As they drove through town, Norah held Grace's hand tightly in the back seat, while Ethan took random turns, watching for tails. Police sirens continued to wail in the distance. Ethan knew they'd find nothing. These men were professionals, they'd be long gone. But they'd be back. The attack on Norah's home was just the beginning. Grace yawned from the back seat. "Daddy, why are we having a sleepover?" Ethan met Norah's eyes in the rearview mirror. She managed a brave smile for Grace, but Ethan could see the fear beneath it. His jaw clenched as he drove on through the darkening streets, looking for somewhere safe to hide. The radio crackled with police chatter as more units responded to Norah's house, but Ethan knew what the uniformed officers didn't. No amount of police tape or incident reports would stop these men. They'd found him, found the people he cared about, and they wouldn't stop until they finished what they'd started. The moonlight filtered through the living room curtains, casting pale shadows across Ethan's worn hardwood floor. He sat in his old armchair, eyes fixed on the street outside, one hand resting near the gun at his hip. In the spare bedroom down the hall, Norah and Grace slept peacefully, their soft breathing barely audible over the hum of the ceiling fan. 2 police cruisers patrolled the neighborhood, their presence both reassuring and a stark reminder of the danger that lurked in the shadows. Officer Martinez, an old academy friend, had insisted on posting guards after the attack on Norah's house. But Ethan knew better than most that badges and guns weren't always enough. He rubbed his tired eyes, fighting exhaustion. The events at Norah's house kept replaying in his mind. The sound of breaking glass, Norah's frightened scream, the look of terror in Grace's eyes when he'd rushed them both to safety. His chest tightened with guilt. "I should have known better," he whispered to himself, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "Should have stayed away from the start." The floor creaked behind him. Ethan turned to find Norah standing there in borrowed pajamas, her face gentle but concerned in the dim light. "You should be sleeping," he said softly. "So should you." She moved to sit on the couch nearby, pulling her legs up beneath her. "Grace is out like a light. Poor thing was exhausted." Ethan's jaw clenched. "This is exactly what I was afraid of, what I've been running from. And how has that worked out so far?" Norah's voice was kind but firm. "At least we were safe before I dragged you both into this mess." He stood up, pacing the small living room. "I should pack us up tonight. Get Grace somewhere far away. Maybe you should leave town too, just until—" "Stop!" Norah's command was quiet but forceful. She stood up, blocking his path. "Just stop, Ethan." He tried to step around her, but she placed a hand on his arm. The touch was gentle, but it froze him in place. "Running won't protect Grace," she said, "or me, or you. It just means looking over your shoulder forever, teaching that little girl that the answer to fear is to hide. You don't understand. These men, I understand perfectly well." Her eyes held his, unflinching. "I understand that you're scared, that you feel responsible, that you'd rather cut yourself off from everyone than risk them getting hurt." Ethan's shoulders slumped. "My partner died because of my investigation, because I pushed too hard, trusted the wrong people. And you've been carrying that guilt ever since." Norah's voice softened. "But Ethan, running away won't bring him back. It won't keep Grace safe. It'll just keep you both lonely and afraid." He sank back into his chair, the weight of years of guilt pressing down on him. "I don't know how to fight them and keep everyone safe at the same time." Norah knelt beside his chair. "Then let us help you fight. This town, these people, they care about you and Grace. They've shown that. Real courage isn't facing danger alone. It's being brave enough to let others stand with you. I can't lose anyone else," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "And you think disappearing wouldn't be losing us?" She reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. "Grace needs her father to show her how to face fear with faith, not run from it. And She paused, her voice softening. "I need you to stay too." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. From down the hall came the sound of Grace, turning in her sleep, mumbling something peaceful and innocent. Ethan looked down at their joined hands, feeling the warmth of Norah's touch, the strength in her gentle grip. Something inside him began to crack. Not breaking, but opening, like a door long sealed shut. "I don't deserve this," he said quietly. "Any of it. That's not how love works," Norah replied simply. "It's not about deserving. It's about choosing to stay, to fight, to believe in something bigger than our fears." Ethan stood slowly, walking to the drawer where he kept his old life locked away. He pulled it open, lifting out his badge. The metal was cool against his palm, the weight familiar. He held it tightly, feeling the edges press into his skin. Ethan's hands trembled as he dialed the number he hadn't used in 3 years. The phone rang 4 times before a gruff voice answered, "Detective Marcus speaking." "Marcus, it's Cole." A long pause followed. "Well, I'll be. The ghost himself." Marcus's tone softened. "Word is, you're in trouble again, brother." Ethan rubbed his tired eyes, glancing toward the bedroom where Grace and Norah slept. "They found me, Marcus. The Reeves gang. They're not just after me this time, they're threatening people I care about. Those cockroaches never did learn to stay dead." Marcus sighed heavily. "What do you need?" "Your help. One last time." Ethan's voice grew firm. "We can finish what we started 3 years ago, but I need someone I can trust. You know they set you up back then, right? The evidence against you was bogus. Internal Affairs finally cleared your name 6 months ago." Ethan's breath caught. He hadn't known he'd been running too long to hear the news. That doesn't change what happened to Parker. No, Marcus agreed softly. But it means you can stop running, Cole. The department would take you back in a heartbeat. Ethan walked to the window, checking the street again. First, we deal with Reeves. I've got an idea, but it's risky. They talked for 30 minutes, working out details. When Ethan hung up, he heard soft footsteps behind him. Norah stood there in her borrowed robe, her eyes tired but determined. I heard you talking, she said. You're planning something. Ethan nodded slowly. The diner. It's where this started. It's where it needs to end. Marcus is bringing a tactical team, but we need to draw them in first. You're using yourself as bait. It wasn't a question. Yes. But you and Grace need to be somewhere safe when… No. Nora's voice was steel wrapped in silk. I won't hide. This is my home, my diner, my life too now. She stepped closer, touching his arm. You don't have to carry this alone anymore, Ethan. Morning brought a flurry of activity. Marcus arrived with 2 trusted officers, and they gathered in Ethan's kitchen. The smell of coffee filled the air as they spread blueprints of the diner across the table. We'll have plainclothes officers here, here, and here, Marcus pointed. Tactical team in these positions. But we need it to look normal, business as usual. Norah poured more coffee. My regular customers will help. They've been watching out for us already. As if on cue, there was a knock at the door. Mr. Jenkins, the retired Marine who came to the diner every morning for breakfast, stood there with 3 other regulars. Heard you could use some extra eyes, he said simply. The planning continued through the morning. The town's veterans, led by Mr. Jenkins, would take their usual spots in the diner. Mrs. Peterson, who ran the flower shop next door, offered her storage room as a surveillance point. Even the teenage busboy, Tommy, insisted on helping. This is more than just a trap, Marcus observed quietly to Ethan. This is a community standing together. Ethan watched as Norah coordinated with the others, her quiet strength shining through. She caught his eye and smiled, and something in his chest tightened. This wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about protecting the family he'd found. Grace emerged from her room, rubbing sleep from her eyes. The kitchen immediately quieted, and Ethan moved to shield her from the planning session. Daddy? She looked at all the people, confusion clear on her face. What's happening? Ethan knelt down to her level. Remember how I told you sometimes grown-ups have to fix big problems? She nodded solemnly. Well, that's what we're doing. All these people are here to help us fix a big problem. He pulled her into a tight hug, breathing in the coconut scent of her shampoo. Everything I do, he whispered. Everything is for you, sweetheart. Grace hugged him back fiercely. I know, Daddy. You're my hero. Over her shoulder, Ethan met Norah's gaze. There were tears in her eyes, but also determination. They would end this not just for Grace, but for all of them. For the chance at a future without shadows, without fear. Marcus cleared his throat softly. We should start getting people in position. The diner opens in 2 hours. Ethan held Grace for one more moment before releasing her. Tomorrow would change everything for better or worse. But looking at the faces around him, Nora's gentle strength, Marcus's unwavering loyalty, the determined community members, he knew he wasn't alone anymore. He touched the badge in his pocket, feeling its familiar weight. It was time to stop running and make a stand. The neon "Open" sign buzzed softly in the diner window, its red glow casting strange shadows across the empty parking lot. Inside, Ethan Cole sat at his usual corner booth, a cold cup of coffee untouched before him. His eyes never left the door. Norah Bennett moved between tables with practiced ease, wiping surfaces that were already clean. To anyone passing by, she looked like she was just closing up for the night. But Ethan could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands shook slightly as she worked. Officer Linda Harrow sat at the counter in civilian clothes, casually reading a newspaper. 3 other plainclothes officers were scattered throughout the diner, looking like tired truckers and late-night customers. The teenage busboy who usually worked nights had been sent home early, replaced by another undercover cop. You okay? Ethan asked softly as Norah passed his booth again. She paused, offering a brave smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I trust you, Ethan. We all do. The words hit him hard. Trust. It had been so long since anyone besides Grace had placed their faith in him. He watched Norah move away, remembering how she'd stood firm when he suggested she stay away tonight. "This is my home too," she'd said. "I'm not hiding." A car engine rumbled outside, then another. Ethan's muscles tensed. He caught Linda's subtle nod from the counter. She'd heard it too. The peaceful quiet of the diner shattered as the front door burst open, the bell jangling violently. 5 masked men stormed in, weapons raised. The leader, taller than the others, pointed his gun directly at Ethan. "Found you, Detective Cole." Ethan remained seated, his voice steady. "Marcus? Still hiding behind a mask?" The leader, Marcus, ripped off his mask, revealing a face twisted with hate. "You almost destroyed everything I built. 3 years I spent rebuilding after your little investigation." "You destroyed yourself," Ethan replied, "when you killed my partner." Everything happened at once. Marcus swung his gun toward Norah, but Ethan was already moving. He flipped the heavy wooden table, sending it crashing into 2 of the gunmen. Linda shouted, "Police!" As she and the other officers drew their weapons, chaos erupted. A shot rang out, shattering the glass coffee pot behind the counter. Norah ducked behind the serving station, staying low as she'd been instructed. One of Marcus's men tried to grab her, but she swung the metal coffee pot into his face. He stumbled backward, howling in pain. Through the diner's windows, Ethan saw movement. Townsfolk who'd been waiting in nearby buildings rushed toward the diner. Old Mr. Peterson from the hardware store. The veterans who met here every morning for breakfast. Even Mrs. Rodriguez from the flower shop. They'd refused to stay away, insisting on protecting their own. Marcus saw them too. "You set us up!" He fired wildly at Ethan, who rolled behind an overturned booth. "It's over, Marcus," Linda shouted, her gun trained steady. "Your whole operation is being raided right now. We got everyone." 2 of Marcus's men threw down their weapons, dropping to their knees. Another tried to run, but was tackled by Officer Thompson near the kitchen. The 5th man aimed at Linda, but Ethan launched himself forward, catching him in a powerful tackle that sent them both crashing into the counter. Marcus backed toward the door, his gun swinging between targets. "You think this changes anything, Cole? You're still a coward who got his partner killed." The words hit Ethan like physical blows, but Norah's voice rang out clear and strong from behind the counter. "He's not a coward. He's the bravest man I know." Marcus spun toward her voice, and Ethan saw his chance. He surged forward, catching Marcus's gun arm and forcing it up. The weapon discharged into the ceiling as they grappled. Marcus was bigger, but Ethan had the strength of redemption driving him. They crashed through tables, trading brutal punches. Marcus caught Ethan with an elbow to the jaw, but Ethan absorbed the blow and drove his knee into Marcus's side. They hit the ground hard, rolling across broken glass and spilled coffee. "Your partner died because you couldn't let go," Marcus spat, blood streaming from his nose. "Just like these people will die because of you." Ethan caught Marcus's wrist as he tried to bring the gun around. "No," he growled. "My partner died because of your greed, but his death won't be for nothing." With a final surge of strength, Ethan twisted the gun from Marcus's grip and slammed his fist into the gang leader's face. Marcus went limp, and suddenly it was over. Linda rushed forward with handcuffs as other officers secured the scene. Through the windows, Ethan could see more police cars arriving, lights flashing. The townspeople were helping tend to minor injuries, bringing blankets and first aid kits. Norah emerged from behind the counter, shaking but unharmed. She hurried to Ethan's side, touching his bruised face with gentle fingers. "Are you okay?" He nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. 3 years of running, of looking over his shoulder, of keeping Grace at arm's length from the world. It was finally over. Officers hauled Marcus to his feet. Blood dripped from his nose as he glared at Ethan with pure hatred. "This isn't the end, Cole," he snarled as Linda tightened the cuffs. Ethan met his gaze steadily. "Yes, it island." He turned away from Marcus's impotent rage, toward Norah, toward the future. Behind him, he heard Linda reading Marcus his rights as she led him out to the waiting police car. Red and blue lights flashed across the diner's windows as police cars filled the parking lot. Officers moved efficiently, securing the gang members in handcuffs and leading them to waiting patrol cars. The gang leader, his face now unmasked, looked smaller somehow as they pushed his head down into the back seat. Inside the diner, the adrenaline was slowly fading. Old Mr. Peterson, who had swung his cane with surprising force during the fight, sat heavily in a booth accepting a glass of water from Jenny, the teenage busboy's mother. Other townspeople who had been part of the trap gathered in small groups, their voices a low murmur of relief and shared victory. "You all right there, Cole?" Officer Martinez, Ethan's old partner from the academy, clapped him on the shoulder. "Need the paramedics to check you out?" Ethan shook his head, though his ribs ached where he'd taken a hit. "I'm good. Just need statements, right?" "Yeah, we'll need everyone's account." Martinez's eyes crinkled with a smile. "But tonight, you helped us catch some really bad guys. The chief's gonna be happy about this one." The diner's bell chimed as more officers entered, notepads ready. Mrs. Wilson, the retired schoolteacher who had surprised everyone by throwing hot coffee at one of the gang members, was already telling her story with animated gestures. Tommy Baker and his wife Sarah, who owned the hardware store across the street, hugged each other tightly. Their teenage son had been the lookout, and Sarah's eyes were wet with proud tears. Around them, other townspeople embraced, their relief palpable in the warm diner air. Norah emerged from the kitchen with a first aid kit. Her hands trembled slightly, but her eyes were steady as she made her way to Ethan. "Sit," she ordered, pointing to a stool at the counter. "Norah, I'm fine. Sit." Her tone left no room for argument. Ethan complied, watching as she opened the kit and pulled out antiseptic wipes. Her touch was gentle as she cleaned a cut above his eyebrow. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, "for everything." He caught her hand, holding it against his cheek for a moment. Words weren't necessary. They both understood what this night meant. The diner's bell chimed again, and this time it was Mrs. Henderson, their elderly neighbor, leading Grace by the hand. Grace's eyes went wide at the mess of overturned chairs and scattered sugar packets, but when she saw Ethan, her face lit up like sunshine. "Daddy!" She broke free from Mrs. Henderson and ran to him. Ethan lifted her into his arms, ignoring the protest from his bruised ribs. He buried his face in her hair, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo. "Hey, Princess, did you catch the bad guys?" Grace asked, pulling back to study his face with concern. Her small fingers touched the cut on his forehead. "Does it hurt?" "Just a scratch," he assured her. "And yes, we caught them. They won't bother us anymore." Grace turned to Norah, who was trying to discreetly wipe her eyes.
"Are you okay too?"
Norah nodded, managing a warm smile. "I'm just fine, sweetheart." She squeezed Grace's hand. "Your daddy made sure we're all safe now." Outside, more townspeople had gathered on the sidewalk. Someone started humming "Amazing Grace," and others joined in. The sound drifted through the diner's windows, growing stronger as more voices blended together in the night air. Reverend Thomas's deep bass carried the melody, while Mrs. Wilson's soprano floated above it. Even Officer Martinez joined in, his voice rough but sincere. The hymn swelled, filling the parking lot with hope and gratitude. Grace slipped down from Ethan's lap and took both his and Norah's hands, tugging them toward the door. "Come on," she insisted. "Let's go sing too." They stepped outside into the cool night air. The crowd parted, making space for them. Nora's fingers intertwined with Ethan's as the voices around them rose in harmony. Some held candles, their flames steady in the still air. Others had their phones out, lights glowing like stars. The hymn continued, soft and strong, a testament to the bonds that had brought them through this night. Standing there, surrounded by the people who had become more than neighbors, who had become family, Ethan felt something heavy lift from his shoulders. The weight of his past, the guilt he'd carried for so long, seemed to dissolve into the melody rising around them. Grace leaned against his side, humming along. Nora's hand was warm in his, and as the town sang their quiet song of victory and hope, Ethan knew he was finally, truly home. Sunlight streamed through the freshly cleaned windows of the diner, catching on colorful balloons that bobbed gently in the morning breeze. The smell of fresh coffee and apple pie filled the air as Norah moved between tables, her smile brighter than it had been in weeks. The old place looked better than ever, with new curtains donated by Mrs. Peterson from the fabric shop and a coat of paint that covered the scars of that terrible night. Grace skipped around with a stack of menus, her pigtails bouncing as she carefully arranged them at each place setting. She took her job seriously, making sure each one lined up perfectly with the edge of the table, just like Norah had shown her. "How's this?" Grace called out, standing back to admire her work. "Perfect, sweetheart," Norah replied, reaching over to smooth Grace's hair. "You're the best helper I've ever had." Ethan leaned against the counter, coffee cup in hand, watching them with a warmth in his chest he hadn't felt in years. The sight of Grace so comfortable here, of Norah's gentle guidance, it felt right in a way he couldn't quite explain. The bell above the door chimed as townsfolk began filtering in for the reopening celebration. Old Mr. Jenkins, who had wielded his cane like a warrior during the showdown, shuffled in first. The retired veteran gave Ethan a knowing nod as he settled into his usual booth. "Place looks good as new," Mr. Jenkins said, accepting a cup of coffee from Norah. "Better even." More neighbors arrived: the high school teacher who had helped board up windows after the break-in, the grocery store owner who had kept watch outside Norah's house, the librarian who had taken Grace in during the worst moments. Each face reminded Ethan of small acts of bravery that had added up to something extraordinary. "Everyone," Ethan called out, his voice carrying across the diner. The chattering crowd quieted. He wasn't used to speaking in front of people, but some things needed to be said. "I want to thank you all. When I came to this town, I was running. I thought I had to face everything alone." He paused, looking at the faces around him. "You proved me wrong." Grace abandoned her menus and ran to hug his leg. He lifted her up, settling her on his hip despite her growing too big for it. "You didn't just protect me and Grace. You showed us what community means, what family means." Norah stepped closer, her eyes shining. "We protect our own," she said simply, and murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. The morning stretched into afternoon, filled with laughter and stories. Children played between tables while parents shared coffee and pie. The diner hummed with life and warmth, healing the memory of fear with new joy. Mrs. Thompson, the choir director, started humming Amazing Grace, and others joined in. Soon the whole diner was filled with soft singing, some voices strong, others wavering, but all sincere. Ethan noticed Norah wiping tears from her eyes as she served another piece of pie. "You okay?" he asked quietly when she passed by. She nodded, smiling through her tears. "More than okay. This is what healing looks like." Grace had settled at a table with some other children, teaching them how to make paper airplanes out of their placemats. Her laughter mixed with theirs, pure and uninhibited. Ethan remembered how withdrawn she'd been after losing her mother, how long it had taken for that laugh to return. The afternoon light began to soften, casting long shadows through the windows. People started saying their goodbyes, heading home with full hearts and stomachs. Grace helped clear tables, insisting on carrying plates to the kitchen like a real waitress. "Careful with those," Norah cautioned, but her eyes twinkled with affection. "I got it," Grace declared proudly, managing 3 plates with intense concentration. As the last customers left, Ethan helped Norah and Grace with the final cleanup. They worked in comfortable silence, moving around each other with an ease that spoke of growing familiarity. A few balloons had settled on the floor, and Grace chased them around, giggling. "Ready to head home?" Ethan asked as Norah hung up her apron. "Just let me grab my coat," she replied, disappearing into the back. Grace was already by the door, holding one of the balloons she'd rescued. "Can we walk by the park?" she asked hopefully. "It's getting dark, sweetie," Ethan started, but Norah emerged and interrupted. "The park's on our way," she said. "And look how beautiful the evening island." Indeed, the sky was painted in soft pinks and purples, and the street lights were just beginning to flicker on, creating pools of warm light along their path. They stepped out into the cool evening air, Grace skipping ahead with her balloon dancing in the breeze. The town felt different now, not just safe again, but more like home than ever before. They passed the library, where Miss Clark waved from inside as she closed up. The grocery store owner was pulling down his shutters, calling out a cheerful goodnight. Grace's voice carried back to them as she named the colors in the sunset, mixing them up in her excitement. "Look, the sky is purple and orange and green." "Green?" Norah laughed softly. "Well, maybe not green," Grace admitted, turning to walk backwards so she could face them. "But it could be." Ethan felt Norah's hand slip into his, warm and sure. Her fingers intertwined with his naturally, like they belonged there. He squeezed gently, and she squeezed back. Under the glow of the streetlights, they walked together, their shadows merging into one long silhouette on the sidewalk. This was what peace felt like, Ethan realized. Not the absence of danger, but the presence of love, of trust, of belonging. Grace's laughter ahead of them, Norah's hand in his, the gentle evening wrapping around them like a blanket. It was everything he'd stopped believing he could have. They approached Grace's favorite park, the swings swaying gently in the evening breeze. A few other families were heading home, nodding friendly greetings as they passed. The streetlights cast warm circles of light on the sidewalk, guiding their way as day faded into dusk. The evening settled softly around Ethan's small house, bringing with it a gentle peace he hadn't known in years. Grace nestled between him and Norah on the worn leather couch, her small body radiating warmth as she clutched her favorite stuffed rabbit. The TV played quietly in the background, but none of them really watched it. Instead, they simply existed in this moment together, this precious slice of normalcy that had seemed impossible just weeks ago. Ethan watched as Grace leaned her head against Norah's shoulder, the way she'd done it so naturally, as if she'd been doing it her whole life. Norah's fingers absently stroked Grace's dark curls, and the sight made Ethan's heart swell with an emotion he couldn't quite name, something between gratitude and awe. "Can we have hot chocolate?" Grace asked, looking up at them both with hopeful eyes. "With marshmallows?" Norah exchanged a glance with Ethan, her eyes twinkling. "I think that sounds perfect for tonight. What do you say, Dad?" The word Dad in Norah's voice, spoken so casually as they sat together like this, stirred something deep in Ethan's chest. He remembered those first nights after leaving the force, when he'd lie awake wondering if he'd ever stop looking over his shoulder. Back then, the weight of his badge had felt like a curse, drawing danger to everyone he loved. "Hot chocolate it is," he said, squeezing Grace's shoulder. "Why don't you help Norah with the mugs, while I get the marshmallows from the top shelf?" Grace bounced up, pulling Norah by the hand toward the kitchen. Their laughter mixed together, floating through the house like music. Ethan followed them, pausing in the doorway to take in the scene. The kitchen light cast a warm glow over Norah and Grace as they worked together, Grace carefully counting out 3 mugs while Norah filled the kettle. It was such a simple moment, but it held everything he'd ever wanted, everything he'd convinced himself he couldn't have. His mind drifted back to that night at the diner, when those masked men had burst in. He'd been so sure it was just another sign that he couldn't escape his past, that danger would always find him. Wrong target, they'd said. Wrong night. But now, watching Norah show Grace how to stir the cocoa powder just right, he knew different. It hadn't been the wrong night at all. It had been exactly the right night. The night that would lead him here, to this kitchen, to this family forming before his eyes. Earth to Dad. Grace's voice pulled him from his thoughts. She stood with her hands on her hips, a perfect mirror of Norah's teasing stance beside her. "The marshmallows? Sorry, sweetheart." He reached up to the highest cabinet, retrieving the bag of mini marshmallows he kept stocked just for these moments. "I was just thinking." "About what?" Grace asked, accepting the bag and beginning to drop marshmallows into each mug with careful precision. "About how lucky I am," he said honestly, meeting Norah's eyes across the kitchen. "About how sometimes the things we think are going wrong are actually going exactly right." Norah's smile softened with understanding. She knew his story now, all of it. The corruption he'd discovered on the force, the partner he couldn't save, the years spent trying to protect Grace by keeping her at arm's length from the world. She knew, and she loved him anyway. 3 marshmallows each, Grace announced proudly, finishing her task. "That's fair, right?" "Very fair," Norah agreed, carrying the mugs to the small kitchen table. "Though I notice you might have given yourself an extra one," Grace giggled, not even trying to deny it. "That's because I'm the youngest. I need more sugar to grow." "Oh, is that how it works?" Ethan laughed, pulling out chairs for both his girls before taking his own seat. The hot chocolate warmed his hands through the mug, but it was nothing compared to the warmth in his heart. He watched Grace blow carefully on her drink, her face serious with concentration. Watched Norah wipe a spot of chocolate from the corner of Grace's mouth with such natural, motherly affection. Once, he'd thought his life would always be defined by what he'd lost. His partner, his badge, his faith in justice. He'd believed that protecting Grace meant keeping her in a bubble, away from connections that could bring danger. But that night in the diner had shown him something different. It had shown him that sometimes protection meant building connections, not breaking them. It meant letting a community stand with you, letting love in despite the risks. It meant finding the courage to stay and fight instead of running away. "Daddy?" Grace's voice was sleepy now, her hot chocolate nearly finished. "Can we say prayers before bed, like we did at church?" Ethan's throat tightened with emotion. Before all this, prayers had felt like distant memories from his own childhood. But now, "Of course we can," Sweetheart, Grace turned to Norah. Will you stay for prayers too? I'd love to, Norah said softly, reaching across the table to squeeze Ethan's hand. They moved back to the living room, Grace's steps growing heavier with approaching sleep. She curled up between them again on the couch, her head resting in Norah's lap while her feet pressed against Ethan's thigh. The trust in her posture, the peace in her face, it was everything he'd ever wanted for her. Looking at them both, Ethan felt overwhelmed by gratitude for the chance to start again, for the love that had found him when he least expected it, for the reminder that even in the darkest moments, Grace could break through. Standing up, he lifted a drowsy Grace into his arms. Time for bed, princess. Night, Norah, Grace mumbled, already half asleep. Love you. The words fell so naturally from her lips, and Norah's eyes glistened as she kissed Grace's forehead. Love you too, sweetheart. As Ethan carried Grace to her room, Norah's quiet humming of a hymn drifted through the house. He tucked his daughter in, watching her snuggle into her pillow with complete contentment. Returning to the living room, he found Norah waiting, her presence making his house feel truly like home. Moving to the front door, he turned the lock for the night, the familiar click carrying a new meaning now. It wasn't about keeping danger out anymore. It was about keeping love in. He closed his eyes briefly, whispering a prayer of thanks that rose straight from his heart. Behind him, Norah's warm laughter mixed with the peaceful sounds of their home, and Ethan knew with absolute certainty he was exactly where he was meant to be. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Ethan Cole, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.